Hello, very good morning to you. Welcome to Arise News. I'm David Glencorse here in London. It's Thursday, the 28th of August, and our top story at this hour. An Australian who's been negotiating for the release of 200 schoolgirls kidnapped by Boko Haram from their school in northeast Nigeria has today accused unnamed politicians of funding the Islamist fighters. Well, according to Nigeria's This Day newspaper, Dr. Stephen Davies is saying that Nigerian politicians are one of Boko Haram's primary sources of funding. Well, he also told ABC News Australia that Boko Haram has had training from Al-Qaeda, and he says he was very close to freeing some of the girls, but that just 15 minutes before he reached the village where they had been left by their kidnappers. A different group of fighters arrived and then kidnapped them again. Well, Dr. Davis has just returned to Australia after 4 months in Nigeria, negotiating to free the Chibok schoolgirls. He has worked in the country in the past, successfully securing the release of kidnapped oil workers in the Niger Delta. But he joins us now on the phone. A very good morning to you, Dr. Davis. Very interesting what you're saying here, that politicians may well be involved in funding Boko Haram. But can you name them? Have you told President Jonathan of this scenario? What's the backdrop to it?
Happy to name them on your program. They are. We've known for some time that politicians have been breeding up gangs as they head towards elections, and one prominent politician in the northeast won an election and 2 elections, successive elections, using young men that were the genesis of Boko Haram, arming them, and other politicians have used similar means. We now have some of the most prominent politicians in Nigeria have been the major sources of funding for Boko Haram, and indeed, as a sponsor, you can participate by nominating targets, which one of them has done, to our knowledge.
And of course, you have absolutely no axe to grind here. I mean, you're an individual who is completely neutral. Okay, you have been an advisor to 2 presidents in the past, but we have heard on our own, obviously, allegations like this before, whereby even President Jonathan himself has said that as far as he is concerned, he knows that certain politicians support and back Boko Haram. But who are these people? Is there a group of them? Are they working in tandem? And why are they supporting them?
Well, we've had this in the Niger Delta. In fact, when in 2004, when I did the surrender of the main rebel group down there, and then when I was working at Coventry Cathedral's reconciliation group for a few years thereafter, we found repeatedly that that candidates for the governorship or were in any of the 36 states often funded gangs, heavily armed them, AK-47s, RPGs. After the election was over, the candidate had won. They abandoned these guys who were heavily armed. Now, this has happened in the north. It's not uncommon. Yes, I have worked for presidents in the past. 1 Christian president, 1 Muslim president. Both were horrified by what was going on, but growing. This has been fueled by several politicians, mainly northern, who, my view now would be that they want to certainly take power at the next election. The problem facing President Jonathan, of course, is he now arrests prominent politicians who may be candidates at the next election. Then, of course, I would suspect that it's the US, the UK, and France, at least, who will cry foul. Say you are, in fact, arresting people to your own advantage in the election. So his threshold for evidence is very, very high. And I don't think that he'll be able to gather sufficient evidence to keep those Western nations happy before this thing is totally out of hand.
So do you think that indeed, if this is the case, that some powerful politicians are backing Boko Haram, they didn't know that things would, as it were, get out of hand like this? Because, of course, we know that Boko Haram has been, as it were, in talks with the likes of Al-Shabaab and other terror groups, including the Islamic State. So things are getting even more serious.
Well, in 2005 and 6, when I was in the far north, talking to some of the cell leaders, there were only 3 cells at that stage, they were certainly being wooed by Al-Qaeda. And they had grown out of a very fundamentalist Wahhabist view of the world, and which mutated pretty quickly. Now, what's happened really since then is these politicians, yes, they have cultivated. However, this now, you're absolutely right. There are Al-Shabaab connections. There have been for at least 18 months that I know of. The guys do meet. When they go on the Hajj, they will meet others from like mind, and they'll find common ground. When these politicians, if they were to be able to come into power in February next year after the election, I suspect that they will have a shock. This is one time they will not be able to turn these guys off, because we have the Tuareg leaders in Mali who are training Boko Haram fighters and sending them back, as well as the connections with Al-Shabaab and ISIS. These politicians will not be able to turn these guys off, and you'll have if you like, the connection between Al-Shabaab, ISIS, and Boko Haram or AQ in the Maghreb. This will flow, and I think what you will be seeing early next year is the new home of fundamentalist terrorism in the world will be that triangle.
Okay, let me take you back to the beginning of our conversation, where you said that you would name on this program those politicians who are supporting Boko Haram. One, are you prepared to do that? And 2, you were also saying that these politicians were actually nominating targets for Boko Haram as well. Can you speak to those 2 questions?
Certainly. Well, the first thing that should happen in Nigeria is arresting the sponsors. This would slow this down dramatically. The fighting would slow down dramatically, and the Nigerian military may have a chance of overcoming Boko Haram. First thing to do is go and arrest former Governor Sharif, former Borno Governor Sharif, who has been funding this for years, built these guys up. He is so frightened that he's going to be picked up. He has now switched parties to the ruling PDP in the hope this will give him protection. That guy is really got to go. And you know, he's enormously corrupt. Why the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission has not yet picked him up is anybody's guess. We can start with one. There is the former Chief of Army Staff, retired in January, well, actually sacked by the President, is another sponsor. I'll give you the names if you like, but I have no fear of it. We're very confident, and it's in fact Boko Haram senior commanders who have been naming them in the interactions I've had over many months, confirming what we knew some time before from other commanders. But we've had the nephew of one man, three of his nephews actually participated in the bombing of the Abuja bus station earlier this year, which was, I think, at least 77 people were killed. They were living in the house with him. He has been linked several times to these activities, and yet why doesn't someone, with the interrogation of the nephews who are in custody by the state security services, in other words, domestic security services, does not seem inclined to want to interrogate these young men to produce concrete evidence against their uncle in whose house they were living and planning the activity. And, quite remarkable.
It is remarkable. Apart from that, about Chibok itself, I mean, how were you able to leverage your own contacts to get